In a shocking revelation, a defector from China has stated they warned the U.S. intelligence agencies that China may have leaked a virus at the World Military Games in Wuhan back in 2019, apparently in November. But the warnings went unheeded. Now, in an interview, this defector is saying he believes China intentionally released this virus. I mean, he tried warning nearly 2 years ago, and it was unheeded. Perhaps if we had listened to this man, we would not be in this massive lockdown, or perhaps it doesn't really matter. For one thing, this guy is said to be a whistleblower and a defector, and it's true. But he did spend 18 years in a Chinese prison for being a dissenter. Naturally, this man probably has some biases against the Chinese Communist Party. And that makes it hard to know whether he's just saying something sensational or if he has some real reason to believe this would be the case. Challenge, I suppose, is that he hasn't been in China. He has no expertise in any particular fields. He's not a whistleblower on COVID. He's just someone we should have listened to a long time ago. But a lot of people are starting to come around to lab leak theory. More and more people are bringing it up. More and more people are believing it. And even The Lancet, who once came out and said, no, it's naturally occurring, says, okay, maybe we do need to investigate this because some ain't right. And we have a new revelation, this time coming out of, I believe it's the Telegraph. Telegraph says Wuhan scientists plan to release coronavirus particles into cave bats, leaked papers reveal. Now, this one's interesting. When you combine the stories, it starts to look more like China was trying to stop coronaviruses and may have actually made things substantially worse. Now, we don't know. I mean, you have this defector saying it was intentionally done. It's hard to know for sure if that is the case, but we do know from one report they were intentionally planning on releasing particles. They were, in the article, it says, they were planning gain-of-function research, creating chimeric viruses that would better infect humans. The idea, I suppose they claim, was to basically block the virus before it could make the leap or something to that effect. Strange. I don't know what to believe other than we really do need to understand the origin of this virus. For one, if China actually did this on purpose, we're talking about an act of war. Now, maybe nobody has the appetite for war. Maybe the intelligence agencies know this, and they're just saying, what's it going to accomplish by going to war with China when the real wars are being fought via fourth and fifth generational tactics, economics and propaganda, for one, and maybe small pressure campaigns in the South China Sea. We may be sitting here demanding some kind of retaliation, and maybe that's why they're not going to come out and publicly state it's true. Or maybe that's why they're slowly easing us into it. It's hard to know for sure. I think Joe Biden's administration has done so much that benefits China to a great degree that I can't imagine that they're actively working against them. In fact, in this new leak, this new revelation, China and the U.S. were working together on this project, in which case, if lab leak is true, and it seems to be, I mean, just look at Jon Stewart. He certainly believes it. It seems that this was a huge screw up, at the very least, which is causing global devastation. And we should hold people accountable for this. But as long as powerful interests shield those who are responsible, they'll get away with it. Now, I'm not sure that our number one issue right now needs to be justice and accountability. We need to be focusing on fixing our economy, as most people, according to 538, I should say many people, according to 538, are saying, I am really worried about the economy. We should be focused on getting people back to work and getting food and supplies to people. We also need to consider that the people who are responsible for this, should it have been a lab leak, need to be stopped. And the only way we do that is if we know who they are, lest we experience this all over again. Now, let's take a look at what this defector had to say. Maybe you'll believe him. Maybe he's got good evidence. Maybe he's just saying something he read in the news. Before we get started, head over to timcast.com and become a member to get access to the Timcast members only section, which has new shows launching very soon. You will also get an advertisement-free experience on all of our latest articles, and your membership funds our journalists. We have reporters on the ground, actually going to events, interviewing people, and showing public sentiment at these protests. We want to do more. We're preparing to launch some documentaries and some shows. We have new member shows coming up really soon. Become a member. But don't forget to like this video, subscribe to this channel, share this show with your friends. Let's read the first story from the New York Post, exclusive China's most famous defector to America, warned U.S. intelligence agencies of coronavirus in 2019. They say Wei Jingshen, the father of China's democracy movement, reveals in a new book what really happened in Wuhan, that he first heard of a mysterious new virus at the time of the World Military Games in Wuhan in October 2019. Highly alarmed, the former Chinese Communist Party insider, whose defection to the U.S. in 1997 made global news, alerted intelligence agencies, a U.S. politician with links to the president and Chinese human rights activist Demon Liu. Asked if he had any sense in the the intelligence agencies were taking seriously his intelligence about a new virus in Wuhan, 70-year-old Wei said, "I felt they were not as heavily concerned as I was, so I tried my best to provide more detailed information. They may not believe there is a government that there is a government of a country that would do something like that, cover up a virus, so I kept repeating myself in an effort to try to persuade them." Wei said he was very worried because whichever way the communist regime released the virus, I felt that the West was not prepared. It was not until December 31st that China involuntarily alerted the World Health Organization there was an outbreak in Wuhan. Beijing denied COVID-19 was contagious until January 20th, 2020, when it admitted there was evidence of human-to-human transmission. Wei, who spent 18 years in Chinese prisons for objecting to the communist regime, is highly respected on both sides of politics and has forged relationships with former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Wei said he found out about the virus from high-level contacts in Beijing. So let me just pause for a minute. Maybe it's wrong of me to say he doesn't have any of that expertise. No, perhaps there are high-ranking dissenters in China who know he is a vector to get information out to the United States and to the world. And that's his connection. Maybe this should have been investigated. Quote, "I talked to Diamond and some other American politicians in the House of the danger of the situation," he said. "There were officials from the White House at the time as well, in November 2019. Wei would not reveal which politician he told. I'm not sure if this politician wants me to talk about him right now. But I want to say he is a high enough politician, high enough to be able to reach the president of the United States." David Asher, the State Department official who spearheaded a task force into the origins of COVID-19, said the opportunity presented by Wei's warnings was like stopping 9/11 before it happened. Asher said the U.S. government had other crucial pieces of early warning evidence in late 2019, but it failed to connect the dots. He said the U.S. government first had intelligence about Wuhan Institute of Virology workers falling sick with COVID in late 2019. A year before, he discovered it during his investigation into the origins of the virus for the State Department. By then, 1.7 million people worldwide had died from COVID-19. Asher said he was shocked when he found out, quote, "We actually could have had foreknowledge. We could have known in November 2019 that there was a disaster occurring inside Wuhan. Instead, their most important biological facilities related to coronavirus research, inside their most important facilities. It was something absolutely tragic, traumatic and dramatic that was occurring, and we could have reacted to it. The whole world could have been different. It would have been stopping 9/11 before it happened. China's authorities were acting to suppress news of the Wuhan outbreak, purging the internet of social media posts and news stories and disappearing dissidents and whistleblowers who attempted to sound a warning. Social media reports about a new coronavirus did not emerge until late December 2019, and it was not until the end of January 2020 that the U.S., Australia, and New Zealand closed borders to travelers from China. Liu reveals, in quote, what really happened in Wuhan, that Wei told her about the virus on November 22nd, 2019, at a dinner where her husband, former CIA agent Robert Sudinger, was also present. I could not quite believe what he was saying at the time. I had thought that the coronavirus could not be worse than SARS. And SARS, as we knew from experience, was not that contagious and it could be contained. I thought at the time that was the case. Okay, there was an outbreak, but the authorities and the advance of medical sciences would be able to contain the spread of it. In the book, Liu details the race to get information about the new virus to the White House and her uncertainty about it. After Wei's visit, she wrote a memo of what he had divulged to her and Sudinger. She intended to pass it on to President Trump's deputy national security advisor, Matt Pottinger. But I didn't send it to him because so many things were so incredulous. I wrote it, but I didn't send it because I decided it was better that Wei talk directly to Matt Pottinger. Wei says in the book, in the past several decades, the CCP's capacity to seal information is hard to be understood by you Westerners. Interestingly, we saw this story from the Washington Post, June 23rd, 2021. This is from Washington Post. Congress is investigating whether the 2019 Military World Games in Wuhan was a COVID-19 super spreader event. Followed by this story, August 3rd. GOP report says October 2019 Wuhan military games were, quote, one of the earliest super spreader events. They concluded that to be the case. This is actually really fascinating. Let me show you what the Washington Post reported. Now, mind you, it's an opinion piece by Josh Rogan. In October 2019, more than 9,000 international athletes from more than 100 countries traveled to Wuhan, China, and many of them later got sick with COVID-19-like symptoms. But there has never been a real investigation into whether the virus that causes COVID-19 was already spreading at the Wuhan Military World Games. Now, multiple U.S. lawmakers are demanding the U.S. begin one. We later concluded, the GOP did, that it was a super spreader event. This is important because you had thousands of people there. Now, and also this defector is saying it was an intentional release. Yahoo reports House Foreign Affairs Republicans concluded the World Military Games in Wuhan in October 2019 was one of the earliest super spreader events during the pandemic, with their new report contending COVID-19 escaped from a Wuhan lab in late August or early September 2019, with China covering it up for months. When they realized what happened, Chinese Communist Party officials and scientists at the Wuhan Institute of Virology began frantically covering up the leak, said Republican Rep. Michael McCall. But their cover-up was too late. The virus was already spreading throughout the megacity of Wuhan. McCall added, within a month, satellite images show a significant uptick in the number of people at hospitals around the Wuhan Institute of Virology with symptoms similar to COVID-19 at the time. Now, for those of you who may remember, there were reports of a mysterious pneumonia going around. Interesting. Many people describe that when they get COVID, it feels like there's a massive weight on your chest and you struggle to breathe. Because of this, some people panic and they get intubated. Perhaps people were mistaking this for pneumonia, or it was a COVID-19 pneumonia. They say. At the same time, athletes at the Military World Games became sick with symptoms similar to COVID-19. Some of them carried the virus back to their home countries, creating one of the earliest super spreader events in the world, and explaining how countries who participated in the games had reported cases as early as November 2019. The new report said its lab leak evidence included athletes at the Military World Games held in Wuhan in October 2019 who became sick with symptoms similar to COVID-19, both while in Wuhan and also shortly after. The GOP report zeroed in on Wuhan, which was picked to host the 7th International Military Sports Council Military World Games in October 2019, during which more than 9,000 military personnel from over 100 countries stayed in Wuhan in accommodations at an athletes' village built specifically for the games. The Chinese state-run Internet Information Center said in October 2019 there were athletes from 109 countries. China's organizing committee of the 7th International Military Sports Council proclaimed that the charm of sports will put Wuhan in global spotlight. The GOP report noted a since-deleted version of the competition's website listed more than 30 venues for the games across Wuhan. One athlete from Luxembourg described Wuhan as a ghost town and recalled having his temperature taken upon arriving at the city's airport, saying, there were rumors the government warned the inhabitants not to go out. The report said similar claims about COVID-19-like symptoms have been made by athletes from Germany, France, Italy, and Sweden. A military athlete from Canada said that on the return flight, dozens of athletes were sick with symptoms ranging from coughs to diarrhea. A German athlete said, after a few days, some athletes from my team got ill. I got sick in the last 2 days. Either it was a very bad cold or COVID-19. I think it was COVID-19. Now, some people are asymptomatic, but I want to stress this point. We've talked to so many people about COVID-19 at Timcast IRL, and they all tell us how horrifying it is to get. I want to stress that because I think a lot of people are conflating the defense of freedom and liberty with and then downplaying COVID-19 as a justification for why they deserve freedom and liberty. Let me make something clear. You are deserving of your rights because they are inalienable to you regardless of any disease. And that being said, there are going to be restrictions based on the severity of certain diseases. And so I can understand some COVID precautions and restrictions. I don't mind wearing a mask in certain businesses. If I have a choice to go to a place that doesn't require a mask, I'd probably go there. I don't think vaccine mandates make sense. I don't think that COVID-19 is that bad. I certainly think it is very bad and one of the worst commonly occurring, or I should say widespread viruses that we've seen. Hearing from people who say that it feels like there's a weight on their chest and they can't breathe and they get scared and they wake up and they can't get a word out without getting winded, I'm like, it's bad. And then seeing even posts from people like Laura Loomer where she's saying the body aches, it's downright painful. I want to make sure this is clear so you understand. I think COVID-19 is extremely serious. I think you should be washing your hands and taking your precautions. And I think you deserve freedom. And I think the government doesn't have a right to impose authoritarian rule. Both can be true at the same time. That being said, they go on to say Republicans had noted that 4 countries who sent delegations to the Wuhan Games have now confirmed the presence of SARS, COVID-19 cases, within their borders in November and December 2019. Italy, Brazil, Sweden, and France. With some athletes complaining of COVID-like symptoms in Wuhan. This is really amazing stuff. Now, you may have seen this report in the past, basically backing up the claims from this whistleblower, or I should say from this defector. Now take a look at the latest revelations from the Telegraph. This one paints a much scarier picture. Wuhan scientists planned to release coronavirus particles into cave bats, leaked papers reveal. Documents reveal researchers applied for $14 million to fund controversial project in 2018. Wuhan and U.S. scientists were planning to release enhanced airborne coronavirus particles into Chinese bat populations to inoculate them against diseases that could jump to humans. Leaked grant proposals dating from 2018 show. New documents show that just 18 months before the first COVID-19 cases appeared, researchers had submitted plans to release skin-penetrating nanoparticles and aerosols containing novel chimeric spike proteins of bat coronaviruses into cave bats in Yunnan, China. They also plan to create chimeric viruses, genetically enhanced to infect humans more easily, and requested $14 million from the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, to fund the work. That one I find rather strange. They were releasing spike protein nanoparticles into bats to inoculate them, but then were trying to create enhanced chimeric viruses that could infect humans more easily? Why? Gain-of-function research. Papers confirmed as genuine by a former member of the Trump administration show they were hoping to introduce human-specific cleavage sites to bat coronaviruses, which will make it easier for the virus to enter human cells. When COVID-19 was first genetically sequenced, scientists were puzzled about how the virus had evolved such a human-specific adaptation at the cleavage site on the spike protein, which is the reason it is so infectious. The documents were released by Drastic, the web-based investigations team set up by scientists from across the world to look into the origins of COVID-19. In a statement, Drastic said, "Given that we find in this proposal a discussion of the planned introduction of human-specific cleavage sites, a review by the wider scientific community of the plausibility of artificial insertion is warranted." My friends, this report from the Telegraph is straight up saying this was made in a lab. They're saying we don't know how COVID-19 has human infectious capabilities. It's so well adapted. It's near perfect. And that in just a year and a half before, they were actively trying to make this. Now, that could mean lab leak. It could mean the defector is correct and it was intentional, perhaps, or it was a lab leak. I don't know about intent. That one's hard. But I think Jon Stewart is right. I don't know for sure, but I would lean in the direction of Jon Stewart when he said lab leak. They go on to say the proposal also included plans to mix high-risk natural coronavirus strains with more infectious but less dangerous varieties. The bid was submitted by British zoologist Peter Daszak of EcoHealth Alliance, the U.S.-based organization which has worked closely with the Wuhan Institute of Virology researching bat coronaviruses. Team members included Dr. Shi Zhengli, the Wuhan Institute of Virology researcher dubbed Batwoman, pictured below, as well as U.S. researchers from the University of North Carolina and the United States Geological Survey National Wildlife Health Center. DARPA refused to fund the work, saying, "It is clear that the proposed project led by Peter Daszak could have put local communities at risk," and warned the team had not properly considered the dangers of enhancing the virus, gain-of-function research, or releasing a vaccine by air. Did you hear that? Releasing a vaccine by air. Now that's something interesting. Grant documents showed that the team had also had some concerns about the vaccine program and said they would conduct educational outreach so that there is a public understanding of what we are doing and why we are doing it, particularly because of the practice of bat consumption in the region. This opens up a whole other conspiracy theory, one that would make a really great sci-fi movie. They tried to create an airborne vaccination delivery system, a virus, which when breathed in, would inoculate you from other coronavirus strains. Instead, it goes rogue and people start getting sick and dying. It reminds me of Planet of the Apes. You ever see Planet of the Apes? They make that virus for the chimps to increase their intelligence, but it starts killing humans. Not the same thing, but what if that is what I'm not saying it happened. I don't know. I don't even know if lab leak is true. It could be naturally occurring, but I really doubt it at this point. I think all the pieces have aligned to suggest something came out of a lab. How? I don't know. But what if they were trying to release an airborne vaccination? Wouldn't that be crazy? I mean, think about the idea. A virus that spreads. I'm not saying it's true, but just think about this idea for a second. A virus that doesn't cause harm to people, but forces the body to build up an immunity to other spike protein related viruses. People would then be spreading the vaccine to each other simply by breathing it in. And then their body would develop immunity to these specific proteins. And then when other viruses come, the body would attack them and shut them down. Isn't that interesting? The mRNA vaccine makes your body produce spike proteins. Spike proteins then get destroyed by your white blood cells, and then your body is trained to attack the pathogens when they arise when they enter because they see the spike proteins. I think it would be, regardless of whether or not they did it, it sounds like something somebody working in this field would come up with, right? The fact that they're mentioning this and the DARPA said we don't want to do vaccines by air is really interesting. Grant documents show the team also had some concerns about the vaccine program and said they would conduct educational outreach. Angus Dalgleish, professor of oncology at St. George University in London, who struggled to get work published showing that the Wuhan Institute of Virology had been carrying out gain-of-function work for years before the pandemic, said the research may have gone ahead even without funding. This is clearly a gain-of-function, engineering the cleavage site and polishing the new viruses to enhance human cell infectability in more than one cell line. Daszak was also behind a letter published in The Lancet last year, which effectively shut down scientific debate into the origins of COVID-19. Viscount Ridley, who has co-authored a book on the origins of COVID-19 due for release in November, and who has frequently called for further investigation into what caused the pandemic in the House of Lords, said, "For more than a year, I tried repeatedly to ask questions of Peter Daszak with no response. Now it turns out he had authored this vital piece of information about the virus work in Wuhan, but refused to share it with the world. I am furious. So should the world be." Peter Daszak and EcoHealth Alliance proposed injecting deadly chimeric bat coronaviruses collected by the Wuhan Institute of Virology into humanized and batified mice and much, much more. The scary part is they were making infections chimeric. The scary part is they were making infectious chimeric MERS viruses, a source said. The viruses have a fatality rate of over 30%, which is at least an order of magnitude more deadly than SARS-CoV-2. If one of their receptor replacements made MERS spread similarly while maintaining its lethality, the pandemic would be nearly apocalyptic. That's scary. They say this is a COVID-19 researcher from the World Health Organization, wishing to remain anonymous, said it was alarming the grant proposal included plans to enhance MERS. I believe they were doing that. Now, isn't that scary? Here's where things are getting more interesting. The Economic Times, COVID origins probe. The Lancet does U-turn over lab leak theory. And we have this from the South China Morning Post. Jury still out on lab leak COVID-19 origins, researchers say in the Lancet letter. Signatories call for further investigation of controversial theory and say there is not enough evidence yet to support the natural origins hypothesis. The host pathway from bats to humans has not been identified. A group of scientists have urged more research on the controversial theory that COVID leaked from a lab, issuing the call in a letter in the medical journal The Lancet on Friday. Now that is doubling down, reversing course. My friends, is this partisan? It shouldn't be. I certainly hope not. But it seems to be. From Fox News, Jon Stewart surprised at meltdown over his belief in coronavirus lab leak theory. Stewart on lab theory once declared debunked by fact checkers. I'm just not sure how that got politicized. I agree. The former Daily Show host shocked media observers in June when he launched into a passionate bit on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert about the coincidence that the Wuhan coronavirus emerged in a city with a super lab that experimented on bat coronaviruses, saying the disease is the same name as the lab. In an interview with The Hollywood Reporter about his new Apple TV project, Stewart cited the Colbert interview while discussing the power of Twitter. It's democratized connection and also democratized destruction. Not to quote MC Hammer, but you can't take the measure without considering the measurer. It's kind of the point I was making on Colbert that everybody got mad about, which was these are just tools. We're the ones that F them up. You're referencing your June appearance on The Late Show, where you went all in on the theory that the coronavirus originated from a lab in China. I couldn't tell if Colbert was entertained by your bit or maybe a little nervous, reporter Lacey Rose said. I don't think he was nervous, Stewart said. It's not like he doesn't know what I'm going to say. Listen, how it got to be that if it was a scientific accident, it's conservative. And if it came from a wet market, it's liberal. I don't know. I'm just not sure how that got politicized. But it was an elegant way to get to a bit that I've done for years, which is our good intentioned brilliance will more likely be our demise. The bit is about the last words that man ever utters, which are, hey, it worked. I guess I was a little surprised at the pushback. I'm not. John, big fan. You've been out of the game for a minute. We're in a tribal world. Critical inquiry is frowned upon if it defies the logic of your cult. Sorry. I can sit next to Alex Jones and criticize him, and sit next to Steve Bannon and criticize him, and sit next to any one of these conservatives and say, I disagree and I object and I think you're wrong. And the conversations persist and people are willing to watch, and people call me wrong all the time and they still watch. I do think it's funny how many Trump supporters, like staunch Trump zealots will call me, a shill or a grifter or a leftist, and they'll still watch. That says something. It really does. I mentioned this before. It says they're willing to watch what people they disagree with have to say. But duh, we all knew that. We know that the Trump supporters are going to mainstream media and fact checking what's being lied about. So that means they're going to watch my content and just tell me I'm wrong. Do people on the left do this? They watch my show and pull clips out of context and then just try and make me look stupid or make you look stupid or make Crowder or anybody, Jimmy Dore or Dave Rubin, Glenn Greenwald, etc. It's very, very different. So, John, when you go out on national TV and espouse an opinion based on facts, if you're challenging the official narrative, you will be called right wing. That's why people got mad. No one who's independent, who's liberal, like truly liberal or conservative, got mad that Jon Stewart was saying it looks like it came from a lab. In fact, when it comes to vaccinations, while there certainly are a lot of anti-vaxxers who are angry about it, most people on the right just simply say, if you want to get vaccinated, go do it. Go talk to your doctor and see what's right for you, right? And they'll make their arguments for themselves. It's much more individualist. So we can have those conversations. They go on to say, while Stewart's progressive comedy made him popular with Democrats and mainstream media during his 16-year run of The Daily Show, some journalists and viewers scolded him for supporting the theory on Colbert's show. Disgraced former CBS News anchor Dan Rather called Stewart's rhetoric dangerous and short-sighted. Washington Post's Paul Waldman fumed that celebrities shouldn't be considered reliable sources of information. And Forbes rounded up viewers uncomfortable with Stewart's words. The reemergence of the lab leak theory as credible or likely after being declared implausible and debunked by fact checkers and media reports in 2020 has led to yet another reckoning for the press on groupthink and bias issues. Some reporters even acknowledged that support for lab leak theory from Republicans like Donald Trump, Mike Pompeo, and Tom Cotton played into why it was initially dismissed in the media. Let me just say, because Republicans were right, the Democrats took the opposite approach and are yelling at Jon Stewart for daring to agree with the far right. And that's why people don't want to come on the show with Alex Jones or Steve Bannon. We say, hey, we're going to have some of those prominent figures come on the show and talk about stuff. I reach out to a bunch of leftists and they say no. You know why? Because Alex Jones would come out and say something like, the elites are screwing over the working class. And they would look into the eyes of the leftist populist and they would say, Alex, you are correct. And you can't have that. You are not allowed to agree if you're in the cult. And see, that proves a point. On the quote unquote right, the not cult, I'll call it, you have people of all different political persuasions disagreeing and having discussions, and there's no fear of cancellation. If I go on a leftist show, no one's going to get mad at me. I've been on Jimmy Dore's show. Nobody got mad at me. In fact, a lot of people were like, oh, that was cool. I've been on a bunch of shows with a bunch of prominent left-wing hosts. But if someone on the left goes on a right-wing show, they'll get canceled. They'll get insulted. They'll get scolded for legitimizing this stuff. Because politics only flows in one direction. Jon Stewart, he didn't realize what had happened because he'd been gone too long. They say Colbert, a staunch supporter of Democrats, appeared uncomfortable with Stewart's take. At one point, quipping he sounded like a lackey for Senator Ron Johnson. However, Stewart said in the interview that Colbert knew what he was going to say ahead of time. Sure, probably did. And that doesn't mean he liked it, because it goes against Democrat narrative. And Colbert is worried about getting hurt in the ratings. You want to know what's really funny about the Jon Stewart story? You can see where we've come, how far we've come. Back during the Jon Stewart era on Comedy Central, Jon Stewart was not the most prominent figure in the country. Not by a long shot. He was a cable TV news comedian. And when people turned on The Late Show, they heard about movies and music and pop culture. They decided to bring Colbert to The Late Show from Comedy Central, dropping his persona and just being Colbert, an insufferable liberal elite, basically what he is. He was funny before when he was poking fun at the system. Now he's just part of it. That means the mainstream is now political. But do these people understand anything outside of celebrity gossip? No. So when they come out and Jon Stewart, who was not part of this world at the time, is brought out in front of the mainstream establishment, they don't get him. They don't like him. He's not a part of their club. He's saying things in defiance to their opinions. And of course, they'll have to criticize him. But Jon Stewart may be right, because we have a defector coming out and saying he had warned about this. And we have a new report about U.S. and Wuhan scientists actually wanting to release coronavirus particles into cave bats and then do gain-of-function research. So you draw your own conclusions on this one, and I'll leave it there. Next segment will be tonight at 8 p.m. over at youtube.com/TimCastIRL. Thanks for hanging out. We'll see you all then.